conference home undefeated streak is over, and we're left with another 6-6 football season. It somehow felt that Army would be the one that would break that streak, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fitting as we are Military City, USA, and Army is one of only 3 teams who has beat us at home in the Dome in the Jeff Traylor era. They just seem to be Jeff Traylor's kryptonite in some regard.
Well, UTSA has struggled to finish in these one-score games versus Army, whether it's on offense or defense, and it comes down to undisciplined play on defense and predictable play calling on offense. And you know what, Atos, in these games, it just kills me because it's like we're killing ourselves, and it's not Army really doing anything special. So you ready to hash this out?
Let's get started. This is episode 126 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atoves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. Well, we had a fun time at this Army game, even if it didn't exactly turn out the way that we wanted. I had a large group of coworkers and some of their family members join us at the game. Several of them were Army fans, including a West Point cadet that was in our group. So glad that they all had a great time. We had some great hospitality from the UTSA fans that were there. And, you know, overall, when you don't walk away with a victory, the best thing that you can have is, you know, a good time with your friends that are around you.
And we certainly do every single season. So, yeah, good way to end the home season, I guess.
Before the game, we recognized 24 seniors. It was a little bit of a surprise to see a couple of the juniors that were in there, particularly Houston Thomas, you know, participate in senior day. He still has a year of eligibility, but, you know, he may be either keeping his options open or, you know, perhaps is just ready to move on from football.
Sure.
There were a couple of other juniors that participated, Alan Pruneda, Alpha Khan. Notably absent, though, were Willie McCoy, Dan Dishman, and Jalen Garth. You know, Willie McCoy and Dan Dishman, I think, both participated in senior day last year, so that might be the reason why they didn't participate. Jalen Garth perhaps is seeking a medical red shirt. We'll just kind of have to wait and see what news comes out of UTSA, but an overall, you know, large group of seniors that were recognized. It's just unfortunate that they didn't get to go out on a high note.
It is, and you know, Atos, as we kind of transition away from, you know, our seniors and thank them for everything they did for this UTSA program, you know, we lose to Army 27-24, and it just seems like this team has trouble figuring out Army. Definitely.
You know, when it comes to this team, you know, we can't say, well, they beat us because they have more NIL or rev share.
Right.
So there's obviously got to be some other things with Army that, you know, Jeff Traylor is going to have to wrap his arms around as we continue to be conference opponents. You know, fortunately, we have a year off next year, but we get to face Navy, which is also a triple option team. So,
yeah, and maybe we have better success against Navy because it's a different armed forces school. But you know what? I don't know. I mean, it just seems like Army just is it. And a lot of it comes down to what we started off this podcast with, which is finishing drives. You know, in the first quarter, the UTSA offense comes out and scores on their first 2 drives. And then the defense comes out, and in Army's first 2 offensive drives, our defense shuts them down. So, you know, good start overall. There's methodical offensive drives. You know, you're kind of owning that time of possession. I remember leaning over to you and telling you, look, if we continue to grind this clock and it just, you know, put some scores on the board, Army's going to start getting a little desperate here.
Yeah, and they're certainly not the kind of team that is built to make a comeback.
Right.
But like you said, you know, we started well, we sputtered, and then that middle 8 just really killed us and shifted the momentum. And it started with that pick 6 at the end of the first half. It just felt like from that point on, we were just trying to play catch up.
Well, yeah, because beginning in the second quarter, everything kind of starts falling apart for UTSA because the second quarter begins this string of 5 consecutive scoreless drives for the UTSA offense. And one of those things that I go back to as I was looking over stats and thinking about everything that I was watching on the screen and in person was we got too pass heavy. We had 18 pass plays in that second quarter alone and 3 run plays. No other quarter does UTSA have such a disparate amount of passes and runs. I mean, the fourth quarter you kind of do, but you kind of knew at the very end you're going to have to pass a little bit more just to move the ball a little bit quicker down the field if you were going to try to, either close out this game. But Hos, I think that's what kills this offense at times, just this imbalance. And I'm not really sure whether it's Owen McCown in the RPO offense just choosing to pass and instead of running it. I still really kind of fall back on the fact that it's more coaching related. And because Jeff Traylor has talked about it many times, didn't really say it about this game, but many times before he has talked about, we just get too pass happy. We get too pass happy. So where that comes from has to start with, obviously Justin Burke, the offensive staff. And to me, this offense just overall just sputtered so much that the weird part, Atos, was that I felt like this offense looked a whole lot more Charlotte game where we only put up 28 points on the road more than it resembled the Tulane or ECU games where we were putting up just about every single drive we were scoring.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because we talked a lot about this magic that you have in the Dome, right? And the fact that, we wear those black uniforms, we play in the Dome, and all of a sudden, everything just seems to work and everything clicks and we don't have drops. And we just didn't see that in this game. At the beginning, yes, that kind of first drive. But once we got to the second quarter, it was like we went from, okay, this is going to be maybe similar to the Tulane ECU game, to your point, back to, is this the offense that played against Charlotte? Because if so, right. Army's better than Charlotte.
Yeah, and so let's get over to the offense then and start talking about that. Offensively, we had talked about Army's defensive preview stats, and that was the fact that, they allowed a certain amount of yards, allowed a certain amount of points, third down conversions. In every single category, we were surpassing exactly what happened, what they statistically did on defense, except for fourth down conversions. And that HOs is what ends up being killer. They allowed almost 60% conversions by an opposing offense on fourth down. In this game, UTSA goes 1 for 4. They only convert 25%, and that's killer because, especially at the very end, you have a fourth down, opportunities, and we just can't move the ball down the field. And, obviously we have the game ends on the fact that we couldn't get a first down on fourth down. So I really want to start on this offensive, just discussion with the offensive line, because I felt like the offensive line did not have one of their better games. When I was watching it, again, that first quarter felt promising. It felt like we were handling everything that Army was throwing at us. But as the game went on, we just started seeing that Army's defense adjusted. They were disguising a lot of looks. And before you knew it, this Army defense was blitzing Owen McCown and made him completely uncomfortable. And the offensive line was having so much trouble just trying to, even if they had the advantage of blockers, this Army defense was still getting through and pressuring Owen McCown. And it was really bugging me because I knew that was going to affect how Owen was going to perform passing wise, because then to top it all off, Ben Rios has probably one of his worst games that he's had in a long time because his snaps were high and they seemed to be throwing off the continuity of this offense, and the timing was off, and it just felt like Owen's uncomfortable because of the blitz, and now he's got to deal with these snaps that aren't coming to him, how they normally come to him. So dealing with all of that, you can expect the fact that Owen's probably not going to have as good of a game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and going back to the offensive line, it's easy to just say, well, now that we've had some injuries, we had a couple of different players in at the end of the season that you can expect some of those mistakes. But like you mentioned, it seemed like there was something else going on because this was not a typical game for Ben Rios.
Right.
But to your point, Owen then has 67.5% completion rate, 266 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. It was his first interception that was thrown by him in the Alamo Dome this season. And unfortunately, it was a very ill-timed interception that became a pick six.
Yeah, as you've discussed, I mean, this is a drive that you've got at the very end of the first half, and you have the opportunity to push ahead in this game, and we were going to get the ball at the beginning of the second half. So you get a score here, Army's probably not going to make a big push of trying to score. You can probably go up like 2 scores here. So very positive area for UTSA. Instead, you get put in a position where some throws are very high, and because they go high and sail on Owen, you get the pick six. And that was such a backbreaker because, it just felt like after that it was just catch up.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing in this game was that the announcers, when we watched it the second time, kept noting that Owen was throwing to his right, and they kept commenting on his mechanics. And we've had other games where commentators have made comments about his mechanics throughout the season, but those were typically in games where we felt like maybe Owen was injured. So it also kind of made you wonder, is this injury not quite healed? Is he overthinking it because he had this injury in the past? We don't even know exactly what it was, but it just seemed to be feeding into him progressively struggling as the game went on. The other thing that was interesting was typically we've seen Owen kind of spread it around. And in the game, at the beginning of the game, he was spreading it around to lots of different receivers. But then as we get into the fourth quarter, we get into crunch time, he got locked into Patrick Overmeyer, and it just seemed like that was part of what kept us from being able to move the offense forward. Like he was just looking for Patrick Overmeyer and maybe not looking at his other options.
And look, we love Overmeyer, but the thing is that it becomes predictable, and that's where I thought maybe this was also predictable play calling as well, where you were just looking for the tight end. And the announcers even mentioned at the very end was, he's been looking at Overmeyer, and you get stuck on the one option, and when you get stuck on the one option, this defense knows that, well, on fourth down, maybe we should just keep an eye on Overmeyer and see if he can throw it to another receiver or see who he trusts. And he didn't trust anybody else. He thought Patrick would make the play, and unfortunately, Patrick's good, but he can't beat essentially what seemed like really good coverage. So, Patrick ends up with 6 receptions, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, you could feel that Patrick could have this type of game throughout the season, and this might be more of like his, the typical Patrick Overmeyer game in terms of, 6 receptions for 73 yards, not necessarily just 2 touchdowns, but, obviously, he's that talented. We just don't get a chance to see him that often like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was disappointing that we had to wait until the last game to see this kind of performance from Patrick, because like you mentioned, he definitely has the talent level. Robert Henry led the ground game with 62 yards. While we didn't really see a lot from him or Will Henderson throughout this game, that did get Robert Henry over that 1,000-yard threshold for the season, making him only the 3rd person in program history to get over 1,000 yards in a season, joining Jarvion Williams and Sincere McCormick. It's kind of interesting because I think at the beginning of the season, we anticipated Robert Henry would have gotten well past 1,000 yards.
Yeah, I mean, unless there was going to be some major injury, it felt like he was going to easily clear that mark because of the way that, the offense was moving at times. But, things happen, and that just wasn't to be, as Robert was really kind of bottled up most of the back half of the season, kind of the conference season. So let's talk about the defense from here as we wrap a bow on the offense, because I think the defense, again, had a pretty good game but couldn't finish. And we talked about the offense and their struggles from the second quarter on. This defense also struggled from the second quarter on because The second quarter began a string of like 3 consecutive scoring drives for Army, and that's killer. Like you've got to be able to slow down this Army offense, and unfortunately, this UTSA defense wasn't able to. I mean, if we go back to the preview stats that we had talked about, 2 of them in particular, and it becomes really the conversions that we should really talk about, because Army's offense was converting about 42% of their third downs. UTSA's defense holds them to only 21% conversions. They were 3 for 14 on third down. We forced them to punt 3 times. That's incredible. Like, that's not usually how these games go for a UTSA defense. However, fourth down, I mean, they are converting a pretty high rate of about 67% of their fourth downs. They converted 80% of them. 4 out of 5 on fourth down for Army. And the one fourth down they didn't convert was in the first quarter. Second quarter on, they're 4 for 4, and they're extending drives. They're continuing to mash that clock. And that, I think, overall is what kind of really hurts this UTSA team, because can't get it done on offense. It becomes bogged down, and then this defense just can't get off the field.
Yeah, I think the play for me that really kind of shifted the momentum for Army and kind of that defensive mindset, I think, was the Noah Short touchdown.
Ugh.
We talked in the preview about the fact that Army typically goes to the short side of the field, and that's not something that you see in a lot of other teams. But in this case, they went the opposite direction, while our defense anticipated that they were going to go to the short side of the field.
Yeah.
And so Noah Short comes around the corner, and our entire defense is on the other side of the field, and it was the longest run Army had all season long.
Army's too smart for that. Like, they're going to see those mismatches, and they're going to take advantage. And that's where I think the coaching, again, matters. Like, we have to find a way to counter. And honestly, it just came down to the fact that they just had enough blockers for all of our defenders. And Noah Short just really took it to the house. But, obviously, I think the bigger undisciplined play, as much as I'd say that, this was part of it, it's not as glaring as Kyan Roberts' days. Late hit on Cale Helms. Atoves, we've seen this from this UTSA defense before, but this season hasn't been as big of an issue. Mm-hmm. But of course, this comes back and bites us against Army.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as that happened, they extend the drive. Army then is able to get the field goal that ties the game at that point. And once they tied that game, it just, like I said, those 2 drives in a row, the Noah Short touchdown, the field goal, getting to that position where they're tying, it just felt like at that point we let Army back in the game. We had them on their heels, and now they're back in the game, and this is where it's going to turn. And sure enough, it did.
Yeah, and it was unfortunate because I thought, for the most part, UTSA had played a decent game. I mean, they didn't play, as we talked about with the offense, as good as they did against Tulane or ECU. This defense wasn't, I would say, as bad as they were at North Texas or South Florida.
No.
Nor were they as bad as they were against Texas State for the most part. So it's just those situations where I've talked about it a million times, and I hate to bring it back up, but when you're playing Army, you've got to be more disciplined than they are. And it's hard because that's just what they do. They wear you down, they figure it out, and they just out-execute. And because of it, that's why they're successful. But and talking about this defense and some of the bright spots, I mean, obviously you've got to come back to Shad Banks, right, Atos? Because, as much as we've talked about him all season, he's really had a great season as a road runner and his only year as a road runner. But to end up with 10 total tackles and a tackle for loss, just a great game from Shad. And I think had we not had Shad and his play in this game, this Army offense might go off a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Getting to special teams, really the only thing I wanted to call out there was just that, once again, the specialists did their job. We had some really great punts by Cale Hogan. We saw Michael Petro come out, hit the field goal when we needed him to. Was hoping that we were going to see him at the end of the game to, maybe get us to a tie and go to overtime or something. But all of that said, I mean, again, I think the specialist overall this season rose to the occasion because they were a big question mark at the beginning of the season, but the way they closed, particularly in this game, was great.
Yeah, there was nothing where I thought, oh my gosh, because of them, this was a disaster, right? And it could have been, but no, they were fine. Let's talk about the all conference teams though, because that came out and this was fun for this Roadrunner team.
Yeah, and a lot of these players that made the all conference team, we've already talked about in this game. Robert Henry and Shad Banks get named to the first team. Again, Robert Henry had a remarkable season, particularly at the beginning. Shad Banks, you just, talked about the way that he has played in this game, his leadership throughout the season. He ends the season leading UTSA in the number of tackles, but really, I think it's been about his consistency and his leadership all season long. And then we just talked about Cale Hogan. He gets named to the second team all conference. Again, came in as a big question mark, but to see how far he has developed this season has been really impressive. And then Houston Thomas, Devin McCune, Jimmy Wyrick, all named to the third team.
Yeah, just really good job from these guys. Obviously, as you said, just a bunch of players that we have talked about throughout the season. And, hopefully, as the ones that return are able to continue to build on this success. And, we'll be able to see them maybe more on the first and second team. We're talking about a conference winning UTSA Roadrunner team.
Well, now we wait for our bowl selection. And, as we've learned in previous years, you can take a look at or read the tea leaves of all of these different bowl projections, but they don't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, ESPN is the one making these calls for the G5 programs. If I had any kind of guess, it would be that we'd likely end up in a bowl in Dallas just based on the pattern that we've seen in the past where we go out of state, we kind of stay in state, but certainly that doesn't mean anything. We could end up in Birmingham or Louisiana or who knows where.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I imagine they'll probably try to keep us regional, just because, if you're not able to try, like sending us to Coastal Carolina last year and South Carolina was just, it's a great trip that we enjoyed, but it's not going to be as friendly for a lot of the UTSA Roadrunner fans. So they're looking to get some more fans to travel to this bowl game. So I would imagine it's probably going to be closer. So cross our fingers, I guess, for Dallas.
And then early signing day is Wednesday. So there's been a flurry of activity on X with, different recruits. We don't necessarily know who's going to sign on early signing day, who's going to wait until February or sign in between those two. But tomorrow afternoon, there'll be a press conference where Coach Traylor will announce, who signed and maybe give us an idea of who to expect or how many to expect that will sign later on in February.
Do you think at any point, and I'm not saying this for UTSA, but just college football wise, it'll come with, this is how much they were given in NIL and just like how everything was signed.
Oh, for sure.
It feels like we're going to get to that point, right? Because that's how it's done in the NFL, and you make this big splash on how we signed them to this contract, right? It just...
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely down the road where you're going to have, some kind of announcement about their rev share and NIL and whatever, particularly for your, maybe your quarterbacks or key signees. Yeah. All right, well, let's move off of UTSA and kind of talk about everything that happened in the conference over this last week.
Okay.
In terms of the games this past weekend, East Carolina beat FAU 42-3.
They found their offense, huh?
Yeah, apparently East Carolina can play lights out when they're not in the dome. Unfortunately, it was one game too late for them, so... Yeah. South Florida beat up on Rice 52-3.
That's... South Florida is so weird. I mean, as much as we're confounded by UTSA at times, like, here they finish the season beating up on Rice, but it's like, again, just like you said, just a game too late for South Florida.
And while Navy took care of business and beat Memphis 28-17 to keep their to keep their conference title hopes alive. Unfortunately, they had lost to North Texas earlier in the season, and North Texas took care of business, beating Temple 52-25. So that put North Texas in the conference championship game and kept Navy from moving forward. Tulane also then beat Charlotte 27-0 to secure their second trip to the American Conference Championship in a row. They will be hosting this time around, though. And it's going to be an interesting game with both North Texas and Tulane now having coaches that have accepted other jobs.
Yeah, it's I think North Texas is a 2.5-point favorite, which is weird, right? Because they're the visitor. I don't think that this North Texas team is going to blow Tulane out of the water. But I mean, it could happen. Like, I'm not, never say never, right? But I don't know that North Texas is that potent. I think if they were around one more year, I think we would be talking about a North Texas team that could just smash anybody in terms offensively.
Yeah, the interesting thing, though, is that the polls came out this week. North Texas is number 24. Tulane is number 20. And James Madison is number 25. So that pretty much means that the winner of North Texas Tulane will be the G5 representative. Now, there's been some other chaos that's happened, and James Madison could still get in if they win the Sun Belt. But we should be assured that one of these two teams will be the G5 representative in the college football playoffs.
Which is interesting because James Madison as well lost their coach. So
Yeah.
it sucks for, I think, G5, G6 to be losing all these coaches, and we're going to talk about the American here in just a second. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool that the American is seen as the premier G6 conference. Nobody cares about the Pac-12. They got some bad teams. The American Conference is where it's at, and that is where you're always, I think, going to find, or at least the first spot you're going to look to for the college football playoff representative. So let's talk about that coaching carousel, because Atov's a guy that I've been making a lot of fun of, but he wasn't Dana Dimmel level for me. I mean, I still respected the guy, but Coach Keebler, Eric Morris, again, UNT fans made up that nickname, not me. I just went along with it. All right,
You just perpetuated it.
Oh, of course, that's who I am, right? He's leaving North Texas for Oklahoma State. It's a good hire, I think, for Oklahoma State, first of all. But what a difference between Eric Morris and Mike Gundy.
Yeah, I mean, could there be two more different people in the world, just in terms of how they interact with people, how they carry themselves? I mean, I'm guessing that donor events are not going to have kind of the same amount of levity with Eric Morris as they would have with Mike Gundy.
No. I mean, I think with Eric Morris, he's much more soft spoken, and I think he's going to bring, I think, the intelligence of the game to Stillwater, and it's just going to be interesting just to see just how they respond to him, because it's easy to say, oh, great hire for Oklahoma State and their fans, it's going to be weird, right? But will they end up accepting him? He's had a lot of issues with his defenses before. So does he bring along Skylar Cassidy from North Texas, or does he hire outside of his realm, right? So it'll be interesting to see what kind of staff he puts together. But either way, Eric Morris is the offense. So I think he'll find a way, and they'll be fine offensively. It's the question's going to be defensively. Who do they find, and are they able to complement that offense with it on the defensive side?
Yeah, and North Texas has moved quickly. They have already backfilled Eric Morris's position. They announced today that they hired Neil Brown, formerly of West Virginia, and then before that, Troy.
Yeah, I think that was a really good hire for North Texas. I mean, Neil Brown is an analyst from the UT this season, and he's been a really good coach. West Virginia, he had mixed results. I think he just didn't gel well with the Mountaineer fans, but he still did a pretty good job over there. As good of a job, I think, as you can do at West Virginia. It's a limited program over there, but he had Troy flying before he left there. So once he left, that program cratered, and then came along my boy. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But yeah, Neil Brown, I think, is going to make an interesting opponent for Jeff Traylor.
Absolutely. And then, of course, your second favorite coach in the American Conference, Ryan Silverfield, aka the Toyota Camry of the American Conference, accepted the job at Arkansas. Or I'm sorry, Toyota Corolla.
It's well, it's not that. It's the fact that Arkansas fans and their reaction to losing out on him, and we'll explain here in a second. But no, it's the reaction from the Arkansas fans because they lost out on Alex Golish, who we'll talk about here in just a second, and to get Ryan Silverfield, it's again you had the sleek Alex Golish, who has flashier offense, and you get a more dependable car, the family car, the settle down car, right? Like I think Ryan Silverfield will be okay at Arkansas, regardless of his staff. He'll be okay, and I think he'll lift him out of the dregs a bit. But he's not a guy that's going to win the SEC. Like his name does not. I mean, he couldn't even win the American Conference for God's sakes. Like you really think he's going to win the SEC for Arkansas? No.
I mean, I just love all of the comments about Ryan Silverfield and how no one has done less with more than he did at Memphis, you know?
I'm telling you. And I mean, here he is going to have SEC money now. So how much less is he going to do? I mean, it's just, it's hilarious. But let's talk about Alex Golish because this was interesting to me. You know, there was a lot of ties with his wife to Arkansas. And so there was really thought that that's where Alex was going to go. He ends up at Auburn. And I question this move for him because, well, it's the SEC. Totally get it. I just don't think that Auburn's a place where you can really succeed. You are going to be well supported by fans in terms of money and resources, but I think they just have outsized expectations. Like it's like national championship or bust. I mean, you think that like some of these other schools have terrible expectations. Like Auburn fans are just ridiculous. So yeah, I don't know that that's going to be a great move, but you know, I could be wrong. And we could be talking about, 3 or 4 years down the line, we could be talking about, how successful he is. We'll just see.
And then, of course, as you alluded to earlier, your boy, John Summerall, is leaving Tulane to go to Florida.
One of the things I loved about John Summerall was the fact that during press conference, he discussed how he lost some friendships because he didn't hire some of his friends, right? And he put it pretty bluntly. Yeah, they're my friends, but I didn't hire them because they weren't the right fit. Having that attitude gives you a chance to succeed wherever you go. And for John, I think if he gets the right offensive mind to go to Florida with him, he's going to be good. And he's already been talking about being a dynamic offense. So that means he's got some names in mind. And I think he's smart enough to me to know this is where I think I need to go. And this is what who I need to bring in, what I need to bring in to make Florida a national championship team again. I don't know that he gets national championship, but I certainly believe that he can get them into the college football playoff pretty soon.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if he can continue his streak of every year as a head coach getting into the conference championship. Probably unlikely that he'll get into the SEC championship next year, but I guess crazier things have happened.
It's true. He might get to play Ryan Silverfield, so there'll be at least one win down, right?
Or Alex Golish. That would be interesting. But really, this coaching carousel, the American Conference, just absolutely got wiped out. And like you said, while that's frustrating and probably maybe a little scary for our commissioner and some of the other people in our conference, I think it's a huge compliment to the American Conference that the SEC, the Big 12, was looking to our conference to find head coaches.
Yeah. There's plenty of talent. And again, the American Conference was going to be the right move for UTSA no matter what. It wasn't going to be the Pac-12. It was getting to the American Conference and having success. And, we'll see if we ever get there, but seeing the other teams that we're playing and that were at a higher level starts to push UTSA. Can we get to that level on the field? obviously off the field we'll have to do some things, but here is what I think is most important. But seeing some former UTSA coaches also succeed is also really cool.
Yes, former defensive coordinator for UTSA, Pete Golding, was named Ole Miss when Lane Kiffin left for LSU. We'll have to wait and see whether or not former head coach Frank Wilson gets retained at LSU, though.
Yeah, I think Pete's going to do pretty well at Ole Miss to begin with. It seems like he's got the team behind him. So let's just see who he brings in offensively, because I think that's going to be a key. If he can find a mind, not at Lane's level, because it's going to be very difficult to do that, but if he can find somebody at that level, I think he's going to be a pretty good success.
And then announced today, former UTSA offensive coordinator Will Stein was named Kentucky's head coach, sticking with our SEC theme here.
That was an interesting hire, because although I know that Will is from Kentucky, it doesn't feel like that was the place where he would start out his career. I thought that he might start out maybe at a G6 or something, and then have success and then move up. Kentucky seems like that might suck the life out of him right away. But in crazier news, it sounds like UTSA offensive coordinator Justin Burke is moving to Kentucky with Will Stein. So for all of you out there that were hoping for a new offensive coordinator for UTSA, you are going to get it, because Justin Burke is moving up, which is not something I would have imagined, I would say, at the end of this season.
Yeah, it certainly is going to be interesting, although there was commentary that he may be moving as the offensive coordinator, but not necessarily the play caller, that Will Stein may retain the play calling, which
Yeah.
I think would be an interesting dynamic, just given that seems like that's how things worked when Will Stein was the offensive coordinator here at UTSA. So,
Yeah, I mean, to probably double your salary but not have to worry about calling the plays. Yeah, I would take that job too if I were Justin Burke. The thing is, I think maybe it gives Justin an opportunity to learn how to be a better play caller, especially under Will Stein, who has been fantastic. He's been fantastic at Oregon, and I'm sure he's going to do well at Kentucky at getting some of this offense to succeed. Wish him all the best, but it'll get interesting to see how he does in that conference.
all of this to say, I think all of these changes offer Jeff Traylor a great opportunity as we head into 2026, because you're going to have a situation where all of these teams in the American Conference are starting out with new head coaches. Some of them may have lots of experience from other places, but they're still going to be building their team together. UTSA is now going to have a search for an offensive coordinator, and maybe this presents an opportunity for Jeff Traylor to bring in somebody from the outside that maybe has a little bit of a different mindset. We know that's not necessarily something he likes to do. He tends to like to promote from within, but he's done a really good job when he has hired from the outside recently. Our running back coach, our linebacker coach. I mean, there have been two of our best position coaches this past year. So I think if Jeff Traylor looks at this as an opportunity, instead of maybe getting frustrated by the fact that, Justin Burke's left and perhaps other people will leave to go work for Will Stein, you can kind of look at it one of two ways, right? But this might offer a unique opportunity for him to A, refresh his staff, and then B, be more competitive in a conference where some of the top programs from this season, South Florida, North Texas, and Tulane, are now rebuilding.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on and talk about UTSA basketball. The UTSA men played in the Jacksonville Classic this past week. They split their games up there. They lost to Abilene Christian 50-61, but they beat Georgia Southern 77-64. That Abilene Christian game was a bit frustrating for this team and frustrating for the fans, I think, that were listening to the game. We just really didn't shoot very well. We shot 36% overall, 20% from three-point, and 55% at the free throw. It just was not a great offensive performance for UTSA.
No, and I think the problem is that this team really struggles at times on offense. Like, it is just a chore for them to score. And I'm not trying to rhyme there. It's just tough to watch them offensively because it's very slow, and it reminds me of something you talked about, a couple of years back when you were talking about the difference between Iowa State and UTSA. You're like, Iowa State, the ball moves quick. It's fast. It's moving really, all over the court. And I was like, yeah, look at how UTSA and why they are where they are, because the ball moves very slow. It's almost like watching like, the young players at like 9 or 10, and you see just how slow they are at trying to calculate everything that's going on the court and try to figure out, where do I throw the ball? What do I do? It's just, they just need to get a much more free flowing offense going.
Yeah, they went through a couple of long stretches in that game of 5+ minutes without scoring, but ultimately Jameer Simpson had 18 points, Michaela Bridge had 10 points. They get to the Georgia Southern game next, and while they struggled in the first half with shooting, they were able to keep it close, and then the second half they really just unleashed their offense. It was kind of like a different team. They shot over 50% in the second half, which overall then allowed them to shoot 38%, 26% three-point. They got to 67.5% at free throw. Another big game from Jameer Simpson. He had 22 points. Brent Moss added 19 points. Michaela Bridge added 11 points. It just really seemed like that game they found their rhythm and they were able to overcome some of those, periods in the first half where they just weren't shooting like they needed to.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, just hearing it overall 38%, the reason I'm laughing is just how terrible were they in the first half that they that they just got them to 38%, right?
Right, shooting 50% in the second half, yeah.
And to see just 26% in three-pointer, I mean, this team hasn't really shown to me that they're a very good shooting team. So they're going to have to play better offense and get easier baskets in order for them to stay in games. And so they're going to have to really lean on that defense. So, I don't know, Atos. I mean, it's going to lead us, I think, to just some interesting games.
Yeah, I mean, Jameer Simpson finishes off that tournament being named to the all-tournament team. Seemed like they had some momentum. They get back to the convo, and then they really just had a bad game against South Florida. They lost 52-82. And we talk about having some problems shooting. It was an incredibly tough night shooting for them. They only shot 27% overall. Again, 25% from three-point.
The ball just wasn't moving. I mean, we talk about how it takes them a while to comprehend. The ball was moving very slow, essentially east-west, instead of moving north-south, or like South Alabama did a pretty good job of cutting off our big guys, but it wasn't to the point of where like it was suffocating them. We just played right into their hands, and we just started jacking up a whole bunch of threes, and this team isn't a three-point shooting team. So, I really think that this team really needs to kind of look back and see what they're going to do on offense, and that's got to be Austin Clonch, right? He's got to figure out what the identity of this offense is going to look like, and he's got to start getting it in place. Because if not, you're going to dig yourself a hole in non-conference, and when you get to conference play, if you're still struggling to figure out offense, it's just going to snowball.
Yeah, and he talked about that in his press conference today. He said he felt like they were doing a better job defensively, but, they really just had to figure out the offensive side and how they can play better basketball overall. He talked a lot about how tough this non-conference schedule is. They've got some big games coming up. Next up, they're playing Alabama on Sunday at 1 p.m. They purposely scheduled these tough opponents because he wanted to test the team and have them ready for conference. But, they're going to have to, A, figure some things out, and then B, get their confidence up, because the last thing you want to do is, get to a point where you feel like, okay, this is insurmountable, and then you're going into conference.
Yeah.
But he did say kind of over the next month before they get into conference play, they have some time in between these games where they're going to spend a lot of time on player development and really trying to hone in and focus in on some skills that he thinks will help them not only improve that individual player, but then also, kind of elevate the team. One other thing to note was that we still haven't seen Vashon Alette preseason, he was an all-conference player, but we haven't seen him in the Roadrunner uniform yet. Jerry Briggs reported that Coach Clonch had said he hoped to see Vashon in a Roadrunner uniform before Christmas. So again, keep an eye on that. It'll be interesting to see, what he does for their level of play. Moving on to the women's team, they were also in a tournament over the Thanksgiving week. They split their games as well at the Hoop Fest Women's Basketball Challenge in Frisco. They lost their first game to Auburn 42-59, and then they came back and beat Grand Canyon University 65-64.
Yeah, that Auburn game sounded like it was just rough. And we've seen this team struggle with turnovers, and there was plenty of turnovers that they just had, and it just, I think it was like 30 of them, and they just didn't shoot well. And you're going to have that against some of these bigger teams, and you're going to have to figure out ways to be able to compete. And you expect it because of just some of the losses that they've had and just the limited bench that they have. However, you got to hand it to Coach Aston. I mean, she came out right after the game and said, we played awful. We played like, we thought that we were much better than we really are. And, she's very direct with how she assesses her team. And, if that's how she felt, I mean, I think it'd be safe to say that I agree with her. And, I think, obviously we weren't able to watch the game, but I'm sure it wasn't very pleasant to watch anyway.
Yeah. It was better just to listen to it. One of the things, though, that she did say was, this game really exposed a lot of issues that they had, things that she had noticed in practice that she'd been trying to tell her team, this is going to be problematic in a game. And so, she was hoping that they were going to be able to kind of take some lessons from that. Then you go into the game against GCU. They had a small lead at half, but they just couldn't quite seem to pull away in that game. And then in the third quarter, GCU starts to mount this comeback. They take a lead at the start of the fourth, and then they got to a point where they had a 10-point lead at about 3.5 minutes left in the game. And at that point, I remember thinking, oh, well, it was another good shot, but, unfortunately, this is just where it's going to fall apart. We're down by 10. There's only 3.5 minutes left, but man, 3.5 minutes left. They came charging back. Coach Aston described it in her post-game press conference as just being a wild couple of minutes. And it was all led by Cheyenne Rowe. She ends up finishing with 20 points, and she just really took charge in those last couple of minutes and was extremely impressive. And it's just, we've talked about it a couple of times and how Cheyenne has really taken a leadership role over these last couple of games. But again, here is Cheyenne stepping up into that role, putting the team on her shoulders and finishing off this game. And for this team to come back from a 10-point deficit and win by 1 point, Coach Aston talked about just how that was really a big confidence builder for this team, because if you're not familiar with Grand Canyon, they had a tournament run, last year. They made it through the WAC. They got to the NCAA tournament. Their coach then left for a bigger program. So yes, they're in a rebuilding, but this is a team that still has, some pieces from that, tournament run last year. So for us to be able to come in having, had such a bad game against Auburn, 2 days before, and then be able to, build back in the last couple of minutes and win this game, I think was really, a big deal for this team, and hopefully helps them build some momentum. Obviously there's still, turnovers were still too high in this game. It's something that's kind of becoming a bit of an issue. They're also getting into foul trouble because, like you mentioned, I think they're getting tired. There's not that many people in the rotation. In this game, Adara fouls out. So again, it's just something that you kind of have to keep your eye on. Coach Aston's talked about how they're really trying to practice playing through fatigue so that they can get through some of these scenarios. All of this to say that Cheyenne ends up being recognized as honorable mention Conference Player of the Week. Second time that she's had those honors this season. So we're really seeing her kind of emerge as the leader for this program. And they're really going to need her because they're playing UNLV this week on Wednesday at 6:30. And UNLV has won their conference tournament, I think, 4 years in a row. So, they're definitely a tough program that's going to be coming into the Convo. And then they're going to go on the road on Sunday and play Baylor at 2 p.m. in Waco.
Both games are going to be on ESPN Plus, so you should be able to check it out. Let's finish off with UTSA soccer. Congratulations to Cam Kloza for being named to the first team All-South region, and Jasmine Kessler, who was named to the third team All-South region. The last UTSA player to receive this United Soccer Coach All-South region first team honors was Cam's sister, Kendall, and she got it at the conclusion of the Roadrunners' last conference championship season in 2022. So she is a second overall Roadrunner to earn a spot on this team, and it's really cool to see it kind of stay in the family, not just Roadrunner family, but
in the
it's
Kloza
literally
family, yeah,
literally the Kloza family. So really cool to see for them. The soccer team is going to be honored at the women's basketball game on Wednesday. So looking forward to not only watching the women's basketball team take on UNLV, but also get a chance to see those wonderful soccer players and get recognized for the wonderful season that they had.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for us. So thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves.
Now the Toves.
We'll be back soon with more basketball coverage and to preview our bowl game.
Birds up.